makes an observation that Sri Aurobindo's Savitri contains everything in the universe. It is an observation which surprises the rational mind, because immediately the question comes, how is it that in 24,000 lines everything in the universe can be captured? It is similar to the idea that we have in the Indian tradition that the Vedas contain everything, all knowledge. But the intuitive mind sees deeper. The intuitive mind recognizes that it is possible to capture large oceans, oceanic chunks of knowledge and compress them or capture them in a single vision, a single statement, a single line, a sutra. This too exists in the Indian tradition. The sutra, literally the word means thread, is an aphoristic single statement that captures within it the glimpse of an entire ocean. Like a thread, like a roll of thread, you can unwind it and it goes on and on and on. And yet you can hold it in your hand. You will find in Sri Aurobindo's thoughts and aphorisms similar formulation, very brief, pithy, but each captures a certain way of looking at the whole universe. And if you try to internalize each of those, you will find your mind rapidly expanding, opening out, becoming wide and multifaceted. In Savitri though, as in the Veda, each line is more than a sutra. It is more than just a glimpse. It is a revealed, inspired expression of an entire experience. It contains within it not only the glimpse, the perception, the perspective, but it also contains within it the power of the sight and the essence of the spiritual experience behind that appearance. And this is the reason why it is called mystic poetry. It reveals that which is hidden, but in its revelation, it gives you the power and the experience itself. And each line in Savitri is thus. In the Veda, each rik is similar. You may recall there is a fascinating article of Sri Aurobindo which is titled The First Rik of the Rig Veda. If I remember right, the article goes for some 15 or 20 pages, where he takes only the first rik of the Rig Veda, analyzes it word by word, goes into the word's root sounds in Sanskrit, into the etymology of the word, and with that draws out an entire philosophy behind each word. Agnim ire purohitam yajnasya. What is yajna, for example? And it goes across 2 pages. And in that he gives a glimpse spanning across time. In the Dwapar Yoga it was like this, in the present, and then in the Kali it is like this, and this is the deeper spiritual sense of it. Just for a single word. And when these words come together, there is not only a whole philosophy, but the whole principle of the yoga is encapsulated in this first rik. And it is such an extraordinary text because it touches yoga, philosophy, science, mysticism, occultism, philology, as well as history. There are references there where he speaks of early periods of human history and how humanity has changed and things like that. And all of that is condensed into that just one first rik of the Rig Veda. In the same sense, if one continued in the whole of the Veda, you can see how much would be captured, how much would be revealed if he began to elaborate. Savitri, in that sense, is paralleling the approach of the Veda. It conveys through the mystic poetry, through the inspired word, in this way condensed the whole experience of the whole universe. The words, therefore, each word the words need to be understood in their deeper sense, and they line similarly. Our mind, as it is presently formed, is not capable of doing that fully. And so, as we read, we receive a first level of understanding. But because there is a power in the words, there is a resonance deep within us in the deeper hidden layers, of which we are not conscious, but those layers exist inside us. And so as we read, we understand something here, but deep inside it feels as if there is something more. I cannot understand, but I can feel it. And if you allow that to happen, if you don't struggle too much with the intellect to reduce to an understanding, if you allow that inner resonance to fill you, then this deeper mystic sense and even the touch of the experience begins to grow in us. And from inside out, our mind is gradually reshaped. The result is, you read those same lines after a month, and now suddenly it reveals so much more. You understand more deeply, even your surface mind understands more deeply. And the resonances are felt even more deep, but more clear, more obvious, more conscious. And perhaps if you read after a year or two, you will find even more. And in that sense, if you read Savitri with this attitude, with this approach, it is a very powerful means for purifying the mind, awakening in it a deeper and a higher light, and eventually liberating it from its limitations and transforming it. And if this can happen in the mind, if you let your whole being remain open as you read, that light, that purifying impact gradually percolates through all the levels of your consciousness. And if done in this way, the reading and the study of Savitri can become a means for the sadhana. But it's very important to recognize that mere mechanical reading will not do that. There has to be a conscious effort in this way to feel and to receive in our deeper layers, and to allow what is received to be held and to work from within. So it requires a certain effort, but an effort which can best be done with a mind which is quiet, not a mind which is intellectually active. Quiet, open and receptive. And then we let the words and the power of the words slowly percolate, absorb and assimilate deeply. It is in this sense that Mother advised some of the sadhaks also to read Savitri as a way to develop their mind, but also as a way of sadhana. And then we begin to understand how this 24,000 lines of mystic poetry can hold the whole universe. Not only in experience, but in the way it is able to see and capture all the essential aspects and movements, powers and principles of the whole universe and its working. There are lines, for example, where Sri Aurobindo describes the whole process by which the form emerges out of formlessness. Very scientific, technical description, which elsewhere in the Life Divine, in the essays on the Gita, or in his commentary on the Kena Upanishad, he takes several pages to elaborate and to discuss. And here it gets captured within 7 or 8 lines. In the portion which I am referring to, this is from the Godheads of the Little Life. He describes how form emerges, and he writes, "At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round, housing some unconceived initiative." This is the description of the 5 elements. First, ether, air, fire, water, earth, by which eventually the world of form is created. The Pancha Mahabhutani. The first of these is etheric, Akasha principle. At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round. In that ether, there are rhythms of vibrations. The ether itself is the consciousness of the self, in which the self begins to know itself and rhythm out in vibration. There is no form or substance felt. And yet, inside that vibration, housing some unconceived initiative, something is held there, like a house holds its inhabitant. There is a huge purpose, an imprint of a will, a vision of what has to become the universe, and the will to form the universe is now rhythming out as vibrations in the ether. Now, as I have described this, you will see already 3 levels at which this is capturing. First, the etheric space, seen almost as the form of a material level. Then inside that, the vibrations, which are rhythming out. And behind that, the unconceived initiative, something which is there as a purposefulness, which is not yet fully formed. Now you will see 3 levels of reality are being described just in this appearance of the ether. In the Veda, there is a tradition that says the whole text of the Veda can be understood on 3 levels. Adhibhautik, Adhidaivik, Adhyatmik. Adhibhautik in the domain of the Pancha Mahabhutani, of form, of matter even. Adhidaivik of the domain of the Devas. What are the Devas? The word itself, Deva, is light. The domain of the play of the divine light, the worlds of the gods, the psychological and the higher psychological domains. And the third is Adhyatmik, of Atman, which belongs to the domain of Atman, of oneness, of unity of the divine consciousness. So each line as you read, you can read it on 3 levels. And here in Savitri also there is something similar which you feel. And already in this one sentence I showed you how the 3 levels at which he is describing this etheric first vibrational power which is released. And after that he describes step by step the other 4 elements. Upheld by supreme original breath, this is the air principle. Expansion and contraction's mystic act created touch and friction in the void. Into abstract emptiness brought clash and clasp, parent of an expanding universe in a matrix of disintegrating force. Now here is the principle of the air, and then moving from there to the principle of fire. And Sri Aurobindo explains this in great detail in the Life Divine and other texts, that from the vibrations of the ether, the air principle is this movement of expansion and contraction. And where vibrations now pass through each other, creating clusters of vibration, which move out as huge expanding movements in the universe. And as two movements of expansion and contraction pass each other, there's a kind of a sense of touch, friction. So brought clash and clasp. Pressures and forces now begin to be revealed and experienced. Force plays against force. And all of this, he says, is parent of an expanding universe. It is from here that what today science describes as the Big Bang originates. By spending, it conserved an endless sum. So as it moves out, it spends, it releases itself. But in the whole universe, nothing is ever lost. What is released then joins to become the origin of another ripple, another wave, another contraction, another force. And then comes the third principle. On the hearth of space, it kindled a viewless fire, capital F. You cannot see the fire, and yet it is there as a power, Agni, that scattering worlds as one might scatter seeds, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. An ocean of electric energy formlessly formed its strange wave particles, constructing by their dance this solid scheme. Its mightiness in the atom shut to rest. I see here the whole description of how from an electric ocean which emerges, which is the fire, the Agni principle emerging out of the expansion and compression. In that electric ocean, the luminous order of the stars emerges. Electric energy creates the strange wave particles. This is all of quantum physics being captured in a nutshell within 2 or 3 lines. And like scattering seeds, it scatters out worlds. You see, today they are speaking of a universe which is made of many universes, a multiverse, many different worlds, and many such ideas, which are all considered to be the cutting edge of modern physics. And you'll find it is all captured here in this first initial release of the energy. And it creates these strange wave particles. By their dance, they create this solid scheme which is locked into the atom. Now you notice, the atom is the first level where you have a stable particle. If you go below the atom, all the particles are constantly in change. If you look at a single proton, according to science, it is unstable. Maximum it can survive for 15 minutes. After that it breaks down. It breaks down into 2 other particles which further modify, and through a change of many steps, eventually it comes back to becoming a proton. Very strange idea. But if you take a proton and a neutron and put them together, as the proton changes, the neutron changes also, and together the two change until eventually you end up again with a proton and neutron. So there is no such thing as stability, and yet there is a repeating movement of change. And somehow when the electron comes, this repeating movement of change of the neutron, proton and electron join together to create a stable appearance. Inside everything is changing, but from the outside it looks like a fixed atom. So in the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo says, the atom is the first type of the ego that nature creates. What is the character of the ego? I am separate and I will protect my separateness. If you try to break me, I will resist. That is how our ego sense comes. That is why we get insecure. That is why we get aggressive, we get angry. All these tendencies of ego problems, we say, are really a sense of being separate and a need to protect that separateness. And you find this in the atom. It becomes separate. It as if carves itself out from the whole ocean of energy of the universe, and it resists change. That is why to break the atom, it takes a huge amount of energy. But when you manage to break it, what it releases is an even greater amount of energy, which is the energy which was condensed and captured. Now all of this, you see, this is captured so simply, so beautifully in a poetic vision, mystic vision, in just a few lines. From there, masses were forged or feigned and visible shapes. Light flung the photons, swift revealing spark, and showed in the minuteness of its flash, imaged this cosmos of apparent things. There is now appearance of forms. And he says sometimes they are not real, they are forged or feigned and visible shapes. They are as if imitation forms. When you look at an atom, you will see pictures when we observe an atom through an electron microscope. You see a distinct form. Sometimes the forms are odd shaped, as if one giant vibrating energy wave. But the form itself inside is 99.999999% empty space. Tiny particles whirling, repeating the whirl, create the appearance of a stable surface. This table, it's 99.999999% empty space. When I hit it, what am I hitting? 99.999 empty space, which is my hand meeting 99.999 empty space, which is this object. But why doesn't it go through? Because something is moving so fast. On the other side, something is moving so fast that the moving things as if collide and push each other away. But even the moving things don't touch. They have an electric field. The field collides. Nothing ever touches anything else. It is only energy, field, pressure of energy meeting energy. When you think of it like this, from the perspective of science, the whole world is almost like an illusion. If you go to a cinema screen which is projecting an image, and you say, oh, there's a beautiful flower, let me pluck it. You try to touch it, you cannot, because it is only an image on a screen, isn't it? But the reality is that even the physical flower is an image carved by a movement of flowing energy. And when you try to touch it and you think you have held it, you're never touching the flower, you're only just touching movement of energy, which is meeting your hand, which is movement of energy. And this is the reality, as science tells us. And Sri Aurobindo captures this in just one line where he says, masses, the appearance of a mass, masses were forged or feigned and visible shapes. It is forging as if creating out of something else or pretending to be, and there is appearance of visible shapes. And so on. I will not go into this part of the text. I want to come to the main text which I had in mind. But this gives you a glimpse of how he is describing in the experience of science, but not only to the material level of the experience, but also the higher levels at the same time. The text we will now look at, which is from the Triple Soul Forces, it's much more tangible, physical descriptions. But if we keep in mind that behind this there is also some deeper truth, some deeper knowledge or insight, then we will get much more from this text. So you will recall the canto which is called the Triple Soul Forces, where Savitri is going deep within herself to find her soul. And just before she meets her soul, she meets three aspects of her soul's powers. The first is the mother of sorrow, the mother of 7 sorrows, who supports all the pain and struggle in the universe. The second is the mother of might, Durga, Lakshmi, who brings strength, power and helps the struggle upwards in the evolution. And the third is the mother of light, who brings illumination. Each of these mothers speaks to her of the work she does, but her limitation, where she fails. And Savitri promises to come back with the power of God to fulfill their limitation and make them capable of fulfilling their work. But each time they have spoken, and before Savitri can make her promise, in between there is what Sri Aurobindo describes as the warped echo which comes from below, from humanity, from the human ego, which is struggling, which is suffering. And after the first mother of sorrows speaks, the human ego says, this world is only a world of suffering, and God made this just to have the pleasure of seeing me suffer. I don't know if you have ever had this experience. It's a very interesting experience. Sometimes life gives us this. We go through severe problems and we feel as if this whole world is only full of pain and suffering and struggle. And somebody must be taking great pleasure from making a world like that, isn't it? And you feel so bad for yourself. You feel self-pity. You feel depressed. You feel unhappy. And if somebody else appears happy, you are angry with them. How dare they be happy? They should be feeling misery like me. It happens to all of us at some time. But it is this human ego which takes this form when it has to deal with extreme suffering. But in the second step, in response to the mother of might, it is the aggression of the human ego. Now wanting to dominate, the Rajasic ego. The earlier was the Tamasic ego. Now it is the Rajasic ego which comes forward and says, I will fight. Whatever God does to me, I will do better. I will improve upon God and things like that. And there in that passage, Sri Aurobindo gives a list of things which this Rajasic ego has achieved in conquering nature and will achieve. And a lot of these are so-called scientific, technical achievements. And in the third, after Mother of Light has spoken, there is the Sattvic ego which comes. And the Sattvic ego is superior. It is not aggression saying, I will conquer, I will achieve, but it speaks of how I have discovered all the knowledge. And after all the discovery of the knowledge, which is also the discoveries of science, it says, but I cannot know beyond this. And it describes what it cannot know, where it fails, the limitation of science. And that's where the Sattvic ego gives up and says, well, probably it's impossible to know. So in these two particularly, in the Rajasic ego and the Sattvic ego, we find these descriptions of achievements of science, which we will take up rapidly one by one. And I think you'll find it much more accessible also as a description. But the first one, the Rajasic ego, is more about conquering nature, whereas the Sattvic ego is more about discovering the secrets of nature, the knowledge aspect. So we look at the Rajasic ego. I am the mind of God's great ignorant world, ascending to knowledge by the steps He made. I am the all-discovering thought of man. I am a God fettered by matter and sense, an animal prisoned in a fence of thorns. Yet have I loosened the cord. I've already gone to the second one. The page is turned, I'm sorry. I come back to the previous one, which is the Rajasic ego. This was the Sattvic ego. So the voice rises up of a revolting slave. He says, his conscious mind, her strong revolted serf, is a revolting slave of nature. I am the heir of the forces of the earth. Slowly I make good my right to my estate. All this is mine to own. I climb. A growing Godhead in her divinized mud, I climb. A claimant to the throne of heaven. The last born of the earth, I stand the first. In evolution, human being is the last. But I am the top and I will conquer the throne of heaven. Reminds you of some of the asuras in the Puranic stories, isn't it? They do a lot of tapas to get to conquer the throne of heaven. It's the same approach which you will see is the character of this very aggrandized, aggressive, vital human being using the knowledge of science. I skip a few lines, so just so that we can get to the main portion. I am God, still unevolved in human form. Even if He is not, He becomes in me. That is, I am going to be God, even if God doesn't exist. The sea was made for me to swim and sail. Everything in the nature is for me to conquer. So the sun and moon are lights upon my path. Air was invented for my lungs to breathe. You see, when science first began its journey, it saw all of nature in terms of a science which is of course ego-based, which wants to conquer, and says, yes, Earth had to have the air created, it had to have ocean created so that the human being could be born, so that life could exist, isn't it? There is even a very powerful statement which comes from the biblical tradition where God is recorded as saying to Adam and Eve that this whole earth is for you to use as you want. And so this became a driving principle in European science, where all resources of nature, well, they're seen as resources for me to use up. Humanity is meant to consume nature. And so everything that happens subsequently in the last 300 years from Europe is really looting nature, raping, destroying, plundering. That's all you can see in the drive of science. It's almost like a virus which is eating up all of Earth and destroying Earth. And this is the same mentality. Sun and moon are lights upon my path. Air was invented for my lungs to breathe. Conditioned as a wide and wall-less space for my winged chariot's wheels to cleave a road. The sea was made for me to swim and sail and bear my golden commerce on its back. The earth is my floor, the sky my living room's roof. All was prepared through many a silent age. God made experiments with animal shapes. Then only when all was ready, I was born. So all of evolution is only experimentation to make this human body. I have grown greater than nature, wiser than God. And now begins the description of what I have achieved. I have made real what she never dreamed. See, all these things we are using here do not exist in nature. You don't have a fan in nature, you don't have a bulb, you don't have this kind of a smooth wall surface made of plaster of Paris or bricks which go inside it or the concrete. In nature you may find the principles, but you will not find a fan spinning like that. I have made it, right? This is the greatness of the science. I have seized her powers and harnessed for my work. I have shaped her metals and new metals made. See, not only we have been able to discover so many different elements in nature, but by combining them, we have been able to create certain kinds of properties in metals which did not exist, which cannot be found in nature. We have, for example, in the appearance of steel, you find a metal which is stainless, it does not corrode, isn't it? And by certain further tweakings of metallic combinations, we can change their properties. We take sand, we melt it, it becomes glass. You put into it a tiny amount of arsenic, and suddenly it becomes what we call a semiconductor, a computer chip, which can conduct electricity on and off. And we can use that to make our computers. Now, you don't find this in nature. And yet we have taken nature's secrets, nature's powers, and used them to create something new. Now, it's easy for us to say that we have done it. But the reality, of course, is who inside us thought that? Who inside us led us to the discovery? Actually, it is nature using our mind. Nature uses wind and rain to carve a mountain. She uses human brain to use her own materials in new ways. You understand? But the ego cannot accept that. The ego says, I have done it. There's a very interesting letter of Sri Aurobindo where he speaks of certain things, certain gifts which were premature, certain discoveries which were premature. And there he points to this, how nature gives certain things. And if necessary, the evolutionary forces will take back if they are misused. The knowledge of the atom, for example, had to be discovered eventually. Equally, genetics is something which is a gift that nature has given us. You will notice all of modern genetics begins just after the supramental manifestation. Because part of this work of the supramental manifestation was to change the very nature of the human consciousness and even the human body substance. To help in the physical evolution, the knowledge has been revealed to us of how nature builds our bodies at the level, at the core of the cell, from where we can begin now to help in nature's process of genetic evolution. But always the first step is for us to misuse. So that also happens much more. We'll see all this shortly as we go along. So I have shaped her metals and new metals made, and then I will make glass and raiment out of milk. What is this? Glass and raiment out of milk. And he says, I will. It is as if when he is writing, it is in the future, but it was in the immediate future, in fact. The raiment is clothes, dress, glass and clothes out of milk. Where do you see something like this? Interestingly, when we look carefully in nature, you see the spider web. Out of his own body's secretion, milk, it creates this fine web. If you take the spider web carefully, it is almost like thin cloth, tissue. But elsewhere, where do you see it? With the silkworm. Silkworm also out of its own body, like the spider, makes this fine thread and weaves. And we take those threads and we weave from it silk cloth, isn't it? And in our experimentation, one day we discover the technology by which we can make polyester fiber. And out of that we make cloth. But where is the polyester fiber source coming? Not from the animals anymore. We are making it from our own chemical mix, milk. And from that we have made not only polyester fibers and of various kinds. There are, I think, 5 or 6 different types, each with different properties. And by playing with the formula of the milk which goes into making these fibers, we can make clothes which are waterproof, clothes which are very thin and yet so strong, which are fireproof. And all these different kinds of materials for clothing are being made purely from these chemical combinations. But the other side, glass. What is glass? Is this transparent plastic which we have today. So you will find many of the glasses today, they look just like melted sand glass, but they are actually made of plastic. They can be fireproof, of course they are waterproof, they can be unbreakable, different degrees of strength, but they are all made by synthetic combinations of chemicals. And none of these technologies existed up to the 40s. They were all after the Second World War, after this text was written. Mother records an interesting incident when she was still in Paris. At that time, in the 1890s, there were many people who were experimenting with mediumship. And they would have people who were mediums who would go into trance and then they would materialize things, spirits would materialize. And in one case, there was a scientist who was attending these, and a spirit materialized and was walking around in the room. So the scientist reached out and grabbed the dress of the spirit and pulled hard. And immediately the spirit dissolved and vanished. The medium screamed and was unconscious. They switched on the lights. Of course, the spirit had dematerialized, but in his hand was a piece of the cloth that the spirit was wearing, the dress it was wearing. And it remained, it did not dematerialize because it broke away from the spirit's consciousness. And this scientist showed it to the mother. Mother records this and she says, it looked very much like the plastic of today. She's saying this in the 60s. So material like that did not exist in the physical world. It was made subsequently. But these are all part of the human mastery. But further he says, make iron velvet, water, unbreakable stone. I will make iron velvet and water, unbreakable stone. Now first we have to understand there is the physical side of the achievement. But the psychological truth that Sri Aurobindo is showing through all these things is that the greatest skill of mastery of matter is when you can take any substance and draw out from it any property. You take liquid chemical and out of that you make glass or fine clothes. You take hard iron and make out of that velvet cloth. Or you take water and make it hard like stone. He points to this in the Indian culture as one of the drives when we see in architecture, for example, entire buildings made of stone. But the stone is carved with such fine lines, such smoothness of curve, that it feels as if it is soft and plastic. When you look at the grills of the palaces, the window grill is made of one piece of stone which has been cut. So fine, so smooth, that it looks almost like it's cloth. It's almost semi-transparent. The light comes through it. That being able to draw out the opposite property from its origin. Hard, rough stone becomes soft, translucent, almost cloth-like. This was the great achievement of the skill. It's not just artistic skill, but it is really a kind of a mastery over matter. But that was not done through a technological thing. It was just done by the skill of carving. You understand? The same way, if you take cloth and you could arrange cloth so that it becomes so hard that it doesn't break. This is one of the skills we will find in so many of the old traditional techniques. In Mahabharata, you will recall this building which was I don't remember the exact term, Maya, building of Maya, where Duryodhana enters. The ground looks like water and the water looks like solid ground. See, the skill of reversing the properties completely is the real mastery. And of course, he can't make out what is what, and he falls into the water instead. So here you find the same idea. Make iron into velvet and water into unbreakable stone. In fact, these things have been done by science. The iron into velvet is somewhat easier to understand if you make very fine fibers of metal, as you see in some of the forms of saris where they put a little bit of gold or silver fibers, threads inside, which are almost flexible and elastic. But here with iron, similar things can be done. But to make water hard as stone is much more difficult. There are two experiments that I know where this has been achieved. One was done under extreme condition of low temperature. When water is frozen, it still can break. It's not harder than stone. But when you take it very low, almost to absolute zero, it takes the character of the strength of steel. But there's another experiment which took place in the time when Sri Aurobindo was still in the body. And it was done by a scientist by the name of Nikola Tesla. He's not very well known somehow because the work he did was so extraordinary that people were afraid. He was ahead of his time. So much of his work was suppressed. But he's in fact the inventor of the whole electrical distribution system which we had, three-phase power, inventor of the tube light, inventor of the motor, inventor of robotics, the first inventor of the radio waves transmission, of solar electricity, all kinds of things he discovered. I always refer to him as a vibhuti in the domain of science because what he did was beyond the human potential, beyond the human capacity. And many of the things which Sri Aurobindo describes here, in fact he experimented with or he described as an experiment to be done. And this is one of them. He did a very strange experiment. To this day, nobody knows why he was doing this. He had a huge tank of water. And he found a way to pump the water at very high pressure. And a thin stream, jet of water, this thick, barely half a centimeter, coming out at a pressure of 10,000 pounds per square inch. Extremely high. And you have this jet of water going, and the pressure is so high that it has the character of solid, like a solid bar. He takes a steel bar in his hand, lifts it and smashes it against the stream of water. Instead of cutting through, it bounces off with a sound, bang. Now imagine water has been made under high pressure, it has been made as solid as steel with the quality of steel. Now he himself does not explain why he was doing these experiments, but subsequently today we are using this technology of water under very high pressure to cut iron and steel. You will find this even in Orissa, there are places you will find they do that. A very thin stream of water is used at such a high pressure that it wears out the steel and it cuts through, like a laser beam. Make water unbreakable stone. Like God in his astute artistic skill, I will light just from here. Like God in his astute of artistic skill, mold from one primal plasm protean forms. So the primal plasm is the first genetic substance, out of which God has made skillfully all these different creatures. And I will do the same. In single nature, multitudinous lives. All that imagination can conceive in mind intangible, remold anew in matters plastic, solid and concrete. So here you see what mind could conceive in imagination, I will make in matter. This is the overall idea. But following the method of God to create protean forms, many forms of species out of one primal plasm, multitudinal lives in one single nature. And this is really the science of genetics. What are we doing with genetics today? We take the genome, and from there, by modifying at that level, we are able to modify the forms of life. We are able to modify the different behaviors, including psychological behavior of different species. And this is something so extraordinary. We have today the potential to create creatures that don't exist, that exist only in your imagination, where what are called chimeras. That means one half is one animal, another half is another animal. In physical form, you could, for example, tweaking the genes of the dog, you could make a dog with wings of an eagle. You take the genetic material from the eagle, genetic material from the dog and splice it in. Now, when first the genetic knowledge was discovered, they thought this kind of stuff will not be easy. Recently, there is a technology which has been discovered called, in short, the abbreviation is called CRISPR. It is a genetic technology so powerful that the discoverers of this technology wanted to keep it secret. They were afraid that it will be misused. Because in one single intervention, you can cut out a huge number of genetic chunks or insert a huge number. You take two materials like this, eagle's genes, dog's genes, and just take out what you want and join with what you want, literally plug and play, and create new creatures. Of course, its positive side is that we can take the human gene and remove from it the genes which create certain diseases, or insert into it something missing which was otherwise creating disease, and you can cure hereditary inherited diseases today with this technology. But because of the dangers of misuse involved, the whole thing is being kept in check. But the technology exists. This is the point. And so this is the aggressive ego looking at nature and taking from nature her skill and using it to create something new. But the idea is still very important. What I can imagine, I want to create on earth in matter. And behind this is actually nature's own impulse. Nature herself, before she creates a beautiful flower, before she creates a new species of animal, she has an idea. At the highest level, it is a supramental idea, real idea, as Sri Aurobindo calls it, which is the power of the consciousness conceiving. And then from there, it enters the domain of life force and matter and molds to create the new species. But the human being can do the same. Not from the highest level, but taking something, a step in between, catching nature's process there, it can recreate, modify. And this is really the vital ego now taking control of nature's process. No magic can surpass my magic skill. There is no miracle I shall not achieve. What God imperfect left, I will complete. Out of a tangled mind and half-made soul of his sin and error, I will eliminate. What he invented not, I shall invent. He was the first creator, I am the last. I see in this whole description the attitude of scientists, of the current vital ego-driven science and its scientists. That I will create, I will improve on God's imperfections, and I will solve all the problems of the world and humanity. And now comes another series of what is achieved and what will be done from there. I have found the atoms from which he built the worlds, the first tremendous cosmic energy, missioned, shall leap to slay my enemy kin. I remember Sri Aurobindo wrote many of these lines well before the atomic power was discovered and the atom bomb was exploded. In fact, 2 or 3 years before the first atomic explosion, he wrote a sonnet which ends with this similar thing, dream of surreal science, I believe. It is again about science's achievements. And the last 2 lines he writes, a scientist played with atoms and blew out the universe before God had time to shout. The image is of a little child. He's playing with something. You see little children, they see electric wires, they start playing. And as a parent, you were not watching, suddenly you see, Arey, what are you doing? This is dangerous. But before you can say, Arey, he has already exploded and blew out the universe. And this is reality, that at the level of the atomic power, it is possible to create a chain reaction which is uncontrolled. This is the danger of the hydrogen bomb. The atom bomb is still relatively controllable. Finally, you are creating a release of energy from breaking an atom. But the hydrogen bomb is creating a release of energy by compressing an atom, not breaking it, by joining 2 atoms, fusing 2 atoms of hydrogen to create helium. But to fuse that, you need so much energy, you cannot do it physically. So for that, you need an atom bomb. You release an atom bomb to fuse energy to create the release of the hydrogen bomb. This is the technology behind. And the release is so much greater. The greatest hydrogen bombs we have are 3,000 megatons. The first atom bomb exploded was 30 kilotons. 3,000 megatons is 3 million times bigger. In the power, 1 million times bigger. In the power of 100,000 times, 1 lakh times bigger. The power which destroyed an entire city, imagine it can destroy now 1 lakh times more in a single explosion. And that release is so great that it could trigger a new reaction, because in the release of the hydrogen bomb, it can compress more hydrogen to trigger a still bigger release, which will trigger a still bigger release, and a chain reaction could even extend beyond our solar system. And that's the danger. When Sri Aurobindo says, and blew out the universe before God had time to shout, it is not just a poetic exaggeration, it is actually a scientific truth. And he wrote that 2 years before the first atom bomb was exploded. And this is around the same time that these lines were written. The atoms from which God built the world, I have found, the first tremendous cosmic energy missioned shall leap to slay my enemy kin. You see in the word, the way he describes, missioned shall leap to slay. It's like the release of this missile. See, missile, the root sound of missile is the same as mission. A missile is that which released, moves with a mission, with a purpose, with a target in mind already planned. So, the first tremendous cosmic energy mission shall leap to slay my enemy kin. The missile leaping out of the silo before it shoots. That whole image he has captured. Long before those missiles were made. But he's seeing it in his prophetic vision and he captures it in this. And what will the missile do? Slay my enemy kin? Expunge a nation or abolish a race. My enemy, but my enemy is still my kin, my family, my same type, my humanity. But when this atom bomb explodes, it can expunge a nation, not destroy. Destroy is crushing, breaking down. Expunge is removing permanently from existence. In the parliamentary records, when somebody uses words which are inappropriate, they say expunged from the records. Now, expunge means you remove from the records in a way that nobody is even allowed to say what it was. Permanently removed. You understand? So, expunge a nation. An entire nation can be wiped out with a single atomic explosion, and never again you will get those things back. That's the power of the atomic explosion. Or abolish a race. Now, this is something even more terrible. An entire lineage of humanity can be destroyed if through the radiation you damage the genes. You see, in Japan, which was as I said, a very small atom bomb compared to what comes later with the hydrogen bombs. To this day, the generations who were on the edge of the explosion, who got burnt and who had the radiation poisoning, their children's children still have genetic defects. And it continues in the heredity, permanently damaged at a genetic level. That's the abolish a race. And all this Sri Aurobindo is seeing and describing. Death's silence leave where there was laughter and joy. If you have ever seen the videos of an atomic explosion, you'll have some idea of how that happens. People had no idea what is going to happen. Let's say in Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Like here we are today. Quiet, beautiful town. People are playing, children are playing in the playground. People are chatting, enjoying, having a laughter. And suddenly there's an explosion. The flash of the explosion comes first. The impact of the explosion sound comes afterwards. But even before you have registered the sound, the heat wave follows and smashes everything in such an instant. Such an instant that you do not even have a chance to know that it came and hit you. There are places where, to this day you can see, people were standing on the road. From the flash which took place, the intensity of the radiation was so great, it evaporated the body instantly. And because the body cast a shadow on the wall, and it evaporated the body with a burst, the evaporated molecules hit against the wall and created a dark imprint of a shadow. Instantly. This is the nature of the atomic explosion. A person is standing, poof, gone. What happens? At the level of the subtle body, I saw this flash, I don't know what happened, my physical body is gone. Dead, effectively. An entire city like that. Vaporized, literally. And that he's capturing here. Death, silence, leave, where there was laughter and joy. What a terrible power. And this, the ego says, I will do this. Or, on the good side, the fissured invisible, that is the broken invisible atom, shall spend God's force to extend my comforts and expand my wealth, to speed my car which now the lightnings drive and turn the engines of my miracles. So I will use atomic power for good, for my comfort and to make myself rich. And how? It will spend God's force. It's a very interesting point Sri Aurobindo makes. Mother comments on this in a different way later on. that the power in the atom is the original creative power of energy which has been condensed and locked. You remember the line we read earlier? Its mightiness in the atom shut to rest, the ocean of electric energy, its mightiness. And this is God's power, the creative power by which the universe was formed. And Mother makes a comment about the atomic bomb and about atomic power also in general. She says it is contrary to evolution, because nature has taken so many millions of years to condense this energy to form the atom, to build upon it. When you reverse it, it is going contrary to evolution. You're releasing, you're undoing evolution. In nature, there is a habit built of the atom to hold and not break. By forcing the atom to break, you're undoing nature's habit. And this is a very important principle. You see, physics speaks of, oh, this is a law of nature. Sri Aurobindo says, no, there is not law of nature, there is habit of nature. Nature took a very long time to rhythm her energies in certain ways. And as long as she keeps repeating that rhythm, we observe it and we say, oh, it should be like that, it's a law. But who made the law? There was no law in the beginning, there was only freedom of self. The freedom of self chose to make a rhythm. See? And nature has taken millions of years to create these rhythms for the formation of the atom and the basic processes of life. And each time human beings intervene to modify that, we are changing that habit, weakening it, loosening it. So when we do genetic interventions, for example, we are increasing in nature now the possibility of these interventions happening by chance, because we are weakening the genetic habit in the cells. The same thing happens at the level of the atoms. So Mother said this. She said every time that they break an atom or break many atoms with the atom bomb, you're harming nature. It's a very interesting incident. I'm diverting from this text, but you'll find it interesting. Mother describes in the agenda how one day she woke up and there was a terrible stench in the air, horrible smell. And so she investigated, she says. She went into the subtle world and saw, and she recognized that the Chinese had exploded an atom bomb very close to the Indian border. Now you see, physically the bomb has a certain distance of its influence. But on the occult level, it releases a horrible smell in the subtle world. And that influence is expanding across the whole earth. And Mother said it was so horrible, it disrupts the life processes on the subtle worlds. Kingdoms and Godheads of the Little Life is a whole chapter there, where he speaks of how these beings on the subtle worlds, they form the biological processes of nature on the earth. And they influence and guide. And when they are disturbed, it affects the life processes in nature. And on that level, she feels this stench, terrible disturbance. And she says it took her 2 full hours to control that contamination and concentrate it and purify and throw it out. I see on a physical level, there is a radiation which is spread out. And we use the same term, containment. When Fukushima reactor exploded, you try to contain the poison, contain the radiation, to block it, to cover it. But on the subtle level, you cannot cover with physical things. And only somebody in the subtle world who has the power to do that can bring together, otherwise it will create far worse results in humanity. And Mother had to do it at that time, continues to do it even today when such explosions are done for test purposes. But at that time, literally, according to official records, the US government exploded at least 4,000 or 5,000 atom bombs. Some of them underground, many of them overground. And the result of that was terrible for Earth and for the climate. Many of the current climate imbalances are continuing results from those experiments. But this is God's force, which I, the ego of humanity, will control to do my errands, to speed my car, extend my comforts, expand my wealth. So atomic power is, of course, the most obvious form. But there's another thing, expand my wealth. There's a superficial form of it. Yes, I will have industries now with very cheap power. But also using the same atomic technology, you can transmute elements and create new elements which are very rare, and that way expand wealth. To speed my car, which now the lightnings drive. What is lightning? Electricity. And this is, he's describing cars driven by electricity. You'll be surprised to know that in fact most of the original cars 100 years ago were electric. And much later, the companies which were selling oil, they tried to kill the electric cars and make cars which were driven only by petrol or diesel, because it would serve their interest. But now again the technology is coming back to electric cars. The idea here is electricity and the conquest of electricity is a small thing compared to the power that you can extract from the atomic technology and turn the engines of my miracles. Then, I skip a little bit. I have tamed the wild beast, trained to be my friend. He guards my house, looks up, waiting my will. So this is conquest of the animal kingdom, where you control animals and teach them to obey your will. I have used the mystery of the cosmic waves to see far distance and to hear far words. And this is our radio, television. Cosmic waves are the radio waves which are allowing us today not only to communicate a great distance, but to see far distance and hear far words. With the radio waves, we are able to see to the extreme ends of the universe today. With the radio telescope, we can see beyond where physical light will not reach because of dust, because of gases, etc., which block the light. The radio telescope can penetrate and still see deeper. It can see inside a star to observe the inside processes like an X-ray. And so these are all possibilities which come when you open out to the radio waves, which he has captured in just one line. I have conquered space and knitted close all earth. Now this is a time when Sri Aurobindo wrote this. Space exploration had just barely started. The first Sputnik had gone out. There were plans to put up more satellites. But he is already describing a network of satellites all around the earth, and a network which knits close all of the earth, which is the modern internet. The basic principle of that is already captured in this vision. Everyone is connected, knitted close by links. You see how that works? When you look at the internet, it is a web. That's why they call it World Wide Web. It's a web of links. And the web is elastic. Each one of us pretty much today here is probably carrying a mobile phone. If your phone is connected to the internet, there's a special number attached to it, which is called an IP address. Every internet node is connected through its IP addresses. The satellites up there are the link points which hold all this web together. And everything through the web is being brought closer and closer. So the link is first conquering space, and through this network which is created, knitted close all earth. And what's the next step from here? Soon I shall know the secrets of the mind. The secrets of the mind is what we are seeing today, partly through the internet, but in the cutting edge of what is described as artificial intelligence, where we are trying to replicate the intelligence of the human being in computers. That knowledge is already being used to watch us, watch our interests, and anticipate and sell to us. So when you go to the internet, every time you search for something, every time you make a transaction, you make a purchase, something on the other side through the computers is watching what you do, what your interests are. And there's a whole intelligence which is profiling you. This person is interested in this person likes to do that, this person, and there are others observing everybody, it creates types. People of this interest like this. And before you know it, it makes you a suggestion, almost anticipating your own thought. Very interesting incident took place. It was a bit of a scandal in the US, where there was a company called Target, which is a big wholesaler, and they sell promotional material to people, anticipating what you're buying. So the father found that Target sent promotional material to his teenage daughter, wanting to sell clothes for newborn babies. He was very upset. He filed a court case. Here is my teenage daughter. She is not even married, and you are trying to promote clothes for babies. What is this misuse? And then it was discovered that it was done automatically by the computer. The computer was tracking her buying patterns and had detected that she was pregnant from her buying pattern and made this offer, and she had not informed her father that she was pregnant. How did they know? They were observing, the computer is observing, you're buying certain soap and certain washing liquids, and suddenly you stop that and buy something which has no smell. You buy soaps which have no smell. Because during early stage of pregnancy, your smell sense becomes very intense, and you want things which don't have strong smell. And this girl went through that shift in the buying pattern, which the computer recognized as a pattern which others who have done before have followed up with buying clothes for children. All automatic, artificial intelligence, and it sent automatically the special offer. And the poor father was shocked. That's the kind of intelligence which today is driving the whole scene behind what appears to us as very simple offers that come to you in the mail or on the internet. You go to a website. It's very strange. It happened to me many times. I had to help somebody else to buy a ticket, which was going to some other country. I made a search on my computer. I left it. It was on a particular website. A week later, I'm going to some totally unrelated website of news items. I'm looking at some news, and there comes an advertisement, cheap tickets for that same destination. So across websites, the computer is following me, the intelligence, and now pushing, because it has seen somewhere on another computer, I had through my account searched for one particular ticket. And this is the kind of intelligence that is actually being used. And who has created this intelligence? The human being. And through this, it is anticipating how we think and trying to master the secrets of the mind. Even mind reading. The goal literally in Google, they declare it like this. The goal for them is to give you the answer to a question before you know it, that you want to know this. So first they used to say, to answer your question before you can ask. Now they say, we want to answer your question before you even know that you want to know the answer to this question. And it's actually happening. Soon I shall know the secrets of the mind. Recently, Obama, 2 years ago, released some $1 billion for studying the human mind through computers in order to replicate the human intelligence. That's really the direction of the current exploration. Next, we jump a little. I shall know mystic truths, seize occult powers. I shall slay my enemies with a look or thought. I shall sense the unspoken feelings of all hearts and see and hear the hidden thoughts of men. Now you see, your first thought when you read this will be, yes, this is occultism. We know of such things in occult sciences, in various tantric traditions. They speak of how you can develop the power to see and read people's mind or influence, etc. But I'm going to give you an example of this, which involves none of this occultism, which is done right now in practice by the military, by methods which are seizing on occult powers, but with a very physical process. So this was being done in the 1970s when the US military discovered that Russia was studying these technologies to use occult means to spy on the other side as well as to influence other people. Russia had at that time 35 different centers developing these technologies, and the US military said we are behind. And so they instituted a research project, spent $20 million, and developed their own technology of what they called remote viewing. You can actually search this term and you'll find all the literature around it. It was being done in military laboratories. They developed a technique by which anybody, any of us, could be taught a method to be able to see something which is far away. And the whole method was made so mechanical that they could train their troops, military people, to use this technique. In the year 2000, around the year 2000, they declassified 10,000 documents of their remote viewing program. And some of them are astounding. I'll just give you one example. It's documented. One of their best remote viewers was given a location to spy on. In Russia, they had seen through their satellites, there was a huge building which had been constructed. It was blocked, you could not see, and they couldn't send ground spies. It was so tightly military controlled. So they turned to these remote viewers, and the way they did it, they don't tell you the remote viewer, they don't tell the remote viewer what to spy on. They give them the coordinates of the place, longitude and latitude, and say, tell us what you see there. And this is part of their documentation. The remote viewer describes the building. Then they say, now go inside. And he describes what he sees inside. And what he sees inside is a huge structure which looks like a submarine. They ask him to measure the size. It's too big to be a submarine. He describes channels for missiles which are slanted, which is never done in a submarine. He describes certain external structures which have never been seen in a submarine. But most of all, the building is too far from the ocean. So why build a submarine so far away? Normally they build it on the edge so they can release into water. So then they tell this remote viewer, go forward in time by 1 month and tell us what you see. Go forward in time 2 months. And each step he is describing how this object is being developed, constructed. And at some point, suddenly he says, there's a series of explosions. Water rushes in, and this object is moving out. So now they had a date. They had a date in the future when this thing would be released in the water. So all their satellites were brought to point at that location on the predicted date by remote viewing. And in fact, Russia exploded the ground in front of this and released the world's largest submarine. All the elements which he saw, the slanted missile silos and all that, were all confirmed subsequently. This is an example of the kind of technology developed in the lab for remote viewing using occult knowledge, but in a way that has been mechanized so much anybody can be taught this. But the next part was what they call remote influencing. So again, as part of those documents, we know the people who were out of the program they've described. During Operation Desert Storm, when they were tracking through satellites Saddam Hussein's movements of his troops, they were using the remote viewing group to track Saddam Hussein's mind. And every day, the remote viewer's job was to go inside the mind of Saddam Hussein and describe what he was thinking, what he was feeling, what he was planning. And this was later confirmed. Some of these confirmations were so extraordinary. At some point, even the person said, oh, this person is sick. And in fact, for 1 week, Saddam Hussein was no more available in the media. And then he came back afterwards. And then they found when they could enter somebody's mind and thoughts, they could also begin to influence their thoughts. And they were trained then to try to influence the thinking of certain world leaders. And then the most dangerous part, you can influence thoughts, you can influence feelings, can you influence the body? Can you make the person fall sick? Can you make the body biologically sick? Can you slow down the heartbeat? In fact, these experiments were done. I'll give you 2 examples here. One was where one of these remote viewers was asked to kill Saddam Hussein, and he said, I will not do that because the consequences for me will be too bad. But just to prove to you that it is possible, I will make him fall sick. So the CIA gave him a date. We want him to be sick from this date to this date. And this man concentrated, he did his work, And actually for those days, the person Saddam Hussein fell sick, and he was not accessible to the media. When he came back, he was obviously seen to be sick, and so on. But in the lab, when they refused to kill human beings, they were asked to show it on animals. So they would bring a goat, wire up the goat to observe his brain waves and heart rate, and then the person would sit across and concentrate to slow down his heartbeat. And gradually the heartbeat of the goat began to go slower and slower until it became so slow that the goat fell down and died. This was actually done. It's recorded. This is all part of declassified documents. What was done beyond this remains classified. So you can be sure they did much more beyond this, because that's the military. That's the nature of this vital ego which wants to master. And you see, all this is captured in 2 lines by Sri Aurobindo. I shall slay my enemies with a look or thought. I shall sense the unspoken feelings of all hearts and see and hear the hidden thoughts of men. Subsequently, they developed what are called psychotronic technologies, where this ability is enhanced using certain technological means. Nikola Tesla, in fact, wrote in one of his scientific notes the possibility of reading what is in your mind by a physical device. It's a very interesting idea. I'll just share it with you how he thought. He says, each time you see an object in your eyes, there's a light on your retina from where there's electrical signal going to your brain, in the part of the brain which visualizes a picture. But suppose you visualize a picture strongly, then it should create a ripple effect in the link that is coming to your retina. And on your retina, there must be some variation taking place in the cells because they are connected. So if with a very sensitive device I measure your retina and ask you to visualize a picture, I should be able to detect that picture in your retina. Sounds reasonable. Unfortunately, in his time, the technology didn't exist to measure on such a subtle level. But today, this is being done with artificial intelligence and brainwave scanning, where you put a little helmet which is measuring 256 points of the brain waves. They watch minute variations of brain waves and then show you pictures. So they'll show you a picture of an animal, of a scenery, of a house, of a tree, of a car, etc., flower, etc. And they will watch how your brain waves are modified each time you see a picture. Next step, very interesting. The artificial intelligence will classify this picture, this brainwave, this picture, this brainwave. And now they reverse the process. They ask somebody to go to sleep and dream. While he is dreaming, they measure the brain waves and try to picturize what the dream is, which would create this kind of brain wave. And what is interesting is, in sleep, they have not yet got full success, but in waking consciousness, if you are asked to close your eyes and visualize a picture, you can detect from the brain waves what your picture is. In other words, you can read the mind of a person using the brain waves in this way with pure physical technology. Now, all of this is part of the possibility which is captured here. And then finally, when earth is mastered, I shall conquer heaven. And the gods shall be my aids or menial folk. No wish I harbor unfulfilled shall die. Omnipotence and omniscience shall be mine. This is the basic drive behind this vital Rajasic ego, is to have God's power and knowledge. But in the next section, where it is the Sattvic ego, the whole focus is much more on the realm of knowledge. I'll just pick from here a few lines. So I am the mind of God's great ignorant world, ascending to knowledge by the steps he made. So this was the whole drive of seeking to know and to master through knowledge. I'll skip lines here. I have mapped the heavens and analyzed the stars, described their orbits through the grooves of space, measured the miles that separate the suns, computed their longevity in time. All this, of course, we know as part of our astronomy. But even here, there are many occult truths. in just a word that Sri Aurobindo uses when he says, orbits through the grooves of space. And this is something which is just now being discovered, that the actual path of the orbit involves a certain groove-like feature in the energy, ambient energy of that. There's as if around the sun a resonance of waves which creates grooves into which the planets move in their orbits. Then he discusses how geography, it goes into the soil. I've classed the changes of Earth's stony crust, and of her biography discovered the dates. See, going back, we're describing what Earth was like 1 billion years ago, and all the cycles that Earth's evolution has gone through, various periods of mass extinction of the animals and things like that. All of that, how do you know? Well, by penetrating the Earth's crust. It's a great achievement. Rescued the pages of all nature's plan. The tree of evolution I have sketched, each branch and twig and leaf in its own place. You've seen these in children's books, they describe the evolutionary tree. All of this is extraordinary. It's as if one day we wake up and have the knowledge now to discover what has happened in the last few millions of years. Of course, in a superficial way, but still. In the embryo tracked the history of forms, and the genealogy framed of all that lives. Now, this is something unusual. When you watch the human embryo growing in fetus, becoming a child, you see all the steps of human evolution in form. First, it's a single cell. Very quickly, it extends to become a tadpole. From there, it becomes like a fish. From there, it becomes like a frog. From there, it becomes like a almost dog-like, 4-footed creature. And after that, it modifies to become the human shape. The whole process of evolution is as if compressed into the womb at a physical level. And we can track it today with the sonography and other tools that we have to see inside, which earlier was not possible. And you trace all this. And the protozoa traced, man's ancestors, the humble originals from which he rose. I know how he was born and how he dies. And then comes the limitation. Only what end he serves, I know not yet. What's the point of this human being? I know how he is developed, but what was the point of his being here? Or if there is aim at all, or any end. I don't know if there is any end or any aim. I have caught her, nature's intricate processes. None is left. Her huge machinery is in my hands. I have seized the cosmic energies for their use. I have poured on her infinitesimal elements, and her invisible atoms have unmasked. All matter is a book I have perused. Only some pages now are left to read. If God is at work, His secrets I have found. But still the cause of things is left in doubt. Their truth flees from pursuit into a void. This is the problem. After all this study, what is the cause? What made for these atoms and their elements? I don't know. I know not. When all has been explained, nothing is known. What chose the process? Whence the power sprang? I know not. And perhaps shall never know. So what chose this process by which evolution would take place, the cell would grow, etc.? Or where did the power come which formed all this? I don't know. And what is, when all has been explained, nothing is known. See, what has science done? We have only explained and described a process. But why? We don't know. And suddenly all this effort, all this humongous effort of energy and exploration and discovery seems meaningless if you don't know why and from where all this came to be. And so naturally the mind of man becomes confused. I'm skipping lines. And he feels as if God is laughing at him because he cannot know all this. Perhaps the world is an error, he thinks, or a dance of Maya. And I cannot reach a higher consciousness if it exists. And so finally he says, human I am, human let me remain, till in the inconscient I fall dumb and sleep. How can man grow immortal and divine, transmuting the very stuff of which he is made? And so he gives up. And of course to this also Savitri responds that she will bring this greater power which will illumine and reveal the higher knowledge of God. So I'll pause here, and we can take up any questions that you have, any queries, anything you would like to raise or discuss. Yes. Yes.
What is the message of neurology you are? They have studied the mind, method, and everything.
So it would be very simple if everybody thought like this, that when we can go so deep into the knowledge of people, why do you need a war? Why do you need to destroy? And unfortunately, the driving force behind was this Rajasic ego, whose goal is to conquer and control everything. So it uses this knowledge to get into people's mind and influence things in order to control. And where it cannot control, it will destroy. It is this mindset which needs to be changed. Otherwise, humanity will continue the same old cycle, the same old mistakes of war. That's why the change of consciousness is the key.
Change of consciousness can also prevent.
Yes, it can prevent, for sure. But in the process, we have developed so much knowledge, and that is something to be appreciated also. We have about 10 minutes. We can look at a few more questions. And it need not be limited to the text we have read also. There is another passage which I have not touched here, where he describes how science originally saw the whole universe as a big clock, watchmaker. God is a watchmaker. He winds the clock and releases, and everything moves mechanically. That is Newtonian physics. And then suddenly, when it was on the brink of finding everything, all falls apart and becomes as if a play of random chance. And quantum physics emerges, and he discusses that. And finally he says even that fails to explain. The same question comes, but why and how? And then he says, after that, if the human soul does not stop and continues further, then there is the possibility of a deeper knowledge and a new science which will be more inclusive, which will not be reductionist to matter, which will link spirit and matter. A new science will emerge. And that is the future of human.
They are all material development. But in this case, there is a role of sacrifice.
The Sattvic ego is the passage we pass through, and that is happening today, where this kind of an approach of helplessness comes. We have understood so much, but we can't solve the final question of why and how. And at that point, either the Sattvic ego gives up and falls back, saying it can't be done, or if the inner soul of man is still alive, awake, it says, now I need to go beyond these limitations and recognize the deeper and higher truths. And this is happening with groups of scientists all over the world. They may be scattered, but there are enough of them, and they are now beginning to connect and to come together, where they are recognizing the truths of the yogic science and beginning to bridge them with the limitations of the current physical reductionist science. I was, in fact, at a conference, it was mentioned I had gone abroad. I was at a conference on 4th of November in the US, where they had brought together medical practitioners and scientists to bring the principles of consciousness and evolution, yogic principles, into public health systems. So the scientists were sharing their research, and they were able to show through research which is unquestionable, using all the best techniques of current physical science, they were able to show that the state of our mind, of our thinking, and of our emotions has a direct impact on the biology, on the health, and even biological and cellular processes. And that by changing our inner state, by taking up practices such as meditation, asanas, pranayam, they were able to make changes in the biology which conventional science could not explain. They were able to show that one person praying for another was able to influence their health, their thoughts, and even their emotions, and even their biological, physical health. All of this research was presented there. It was fascinating to see. They were speaking of these things as if it's the next step necessary if we are to bring a real change in the approach to health. And there was one question which took it to a completely new level. There was a presentation by a scientist who was comparing the yogic framework of the human being with the current biological framework, which looks at a human being as an accumulation of cells. The yogic framework looks at the human being as 5 layers of koshas, 5 bodies, in hierarchy, one upon the other. And he says, how do you reconcile these two different models? And then he goes into the physical exploration of the human body and shows how in the biological process, there is a hierarchy of influences from gross physical through the energetic to psychological, which matches this framework. And he shows how we can review the whole thing and create a bridge between the yogic knowledge and the biological current knowledge, and how it will change the whole approach to medicine. And at that point, there was a question somebody asked, because these are documented facts, only we can't explain them with the current biology model. They have observed that in certain cases where a human being has multiple personality, sometimes the multiple personality also changes the health with the personality. In other words, here's a person who has multiple personality. He switches between 2 or 3 personalities. In this personality, he is completely healthy. In another personality, he has diabetes. If he eats sugar, he has all the effects biologically at a cellular level of diabetes, and he falls very sick. And in another personality, he has not diabetes, it's another disease, I don't remember now, I think kidney problem. That problem goes away completely when he switches personality and has diabetes, and it goes completely away when he has the other personality where he's healthy. Imagine diabetes can be switched off and switched on just by his switch of personality. His kidney problem is switched on, switched off. You would have to be on dialysis, and suddenly he switches personality and he doesn't need dialysis, he's fine. How do you explain that? You cannot explain it by current biological cellular based models. Because the cell is supposed to function the same, whatever happens to your psychology, remember? But here you're switching personality instantly and all the cells in your body starts working differently. And so the person who was discussing this in the main presentation, he said, it's true, these things have been observed. Modern science discards this evidence because it cannot explain it. But the only way we can explain it is if we recognize that behind the physical symptoms there is an energetic cause. That what we call diabetes is itself a symptom of an imbalance at an energetic level. What we call kidney failure is itself a symptom of an energetic imbalance. And you switch the energy and the whole chain follows. That's the only explanation. And we come there naturally to this model of the Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha. That we are not just this gross body, we are much more the subtle body of pranic energy and the mental body, through which the biology of the physical body is actually regulated. These are all discussions happening on the cutting edge of exploration, and they indicate that very soon there will be an accepted movement forward in science.
Well, first come away out of this system. If you go to surrender light, then you also develop better perspective. It's happening. But the other side goes to the wall, it's materialistic. When a computer is developing,
You see, the problem of development today is who sets the plan, who chooses the model of development. And mostly the politicians who choose are themselves puppets of industrialists. And the industries look at what will benefit them and influence the policy of the politicians. And the whole governance structure is hijacked by these interests who do not look at what you need, who do not look at what is good for the earth, who do not look at what is the evolutionary purpose. They will go against all this if it serves their immediate, temporary, short-term benefit. This is the problem today. And the bigger problem is, if a good person wants to get into the system of governance, the system itself will expel you long before you can get in. It will only allow you to enter if you have been corrupted by the same processes as they have been corrupted. And this is why what happened in India 2 years ago is so important. There was a miraculous intervention. And it was not by human effort. Human effort helped, of course, but there was an intervention from above that allowed a sudden, surprising change in the political scenario of India. Even the politicians were upset. They didn't want a person to come to power who is not corrupted as they are. And this one person is himself under opposition from all the existing system of politics. But a few decisions being made from there and done carefully, systematically, can change radically everything in our national life. And the effort is being made. And this was possible because of a divine intervention. Similar interventions have to happen everywhere in the world. But for that you need good people who are strong enough, who are committed enough, and who have a deeper and selfless vision. As long as we live by what is useful for me or my interests, nothing will change. And it is by this shift of thinking that it will begin. Eventually though, our prayers can help immensely, but much more than our prayers, we ourselves have to begin in our lives to make that change. I was there at the United Nations conference in Marrakesh, in Morocco, before coming here. And there we had this discussion. They were all talking about climate change and what to do. Most of the discussion was on the business of climate change. Here, we will sell you products, or there you can carbon trade to make money from climate change. All of these ideas, it was all about business and the business of climate change. And our group was a group of leaders from various spiritual and religious traditions all over the world. It was the only group which was speaking of the deeper psychological and spiritual cause. And we said, I'm summarizing what many people said, that the real crisis is a spiritual crisis. Because we have stopped recognizing that Mother Earth is a conscious being, that we are her children, that we are a part of Mother Nature. We have separated ourselves out, we have lost that connection, and now we are trying to ride and dominate, suppress, and in the process destroy Mother Nature. So we have to put ourselves back in right relation with her first. Second, stop thinking in terms of my personal benefit. Start thinking of what is good for the whole. One of the points which was made also that we have always been thinking in terms of our lifetime or our immediate space. But in the past we were taught, and this was part of the Indian tradition also, to think in terms of 7 generations. You see, when you offer to your ancestors, going back 7 generations, you recognize that today you are what you are and you have what you have because of their good efforts. In the same way, your efforts are preparing the next 7 generations and influencing them. And in each thing you do, you must be conscious of how it's affecting them. You throw plastic waste in the water, you must realize that this will leach off chemicals which will modify the fish, which will poison the water, which will eventually influence genetically your children and their children, the future humanity, by poisoning the waters. And you have to start thinking in future terms. There was an example given in that discussion of a very famous person in the United States stock market trading system who said, why should I care about future generations? What have they done for me? You see the short-term thinking. They are not even born. What have they done for me? So I shouldn't care for them. But what he missed was, what he has today is because of what his past forefathers did for him. And so it's not about rights, it's about responsibilities. Just as you have benefited from the responsibility they took for you, you have to take responsibility for those who follow after you. So just the thinking to be in terms of a longer period of time and larger expanse of space, that will change our behavior. But our current education is teaching us to think only in terms of short term, my interest. And so this whole process needs to be reversed. And finally, one person who was a Buddhist monk, he made a very interesting comment. He said, you want to reduce 30% of the carbon? Well, first step, reduce 30% of your greed. If you reduce 30% your greed, automatically carbon reduction will take place by 30% or even more. So these are all deeper psycho-spiritual dimensions of the current crisis. Basically, what Mother said, and what Sri Aurobindo has been saying for the last 100 years, that we are at a time of an evolutionary crisis. And it is a spiritual crisis first, which is leading to the material crisis, economic crisis, political crisis, social crisis, etc. And so there is a need for us to correct it at a spiritual level first. And that's where the physical crisis is forcing us to recognize this deeper dimension. We will not survive otherwise. Mother wrote in 1971, 70 and 71. I think 1970 she gave the message, men, countries, continents. The choice is imperative, truth or the abyss. Again, you have to read this with great depth. She is naming three, men, countries, continents. So first of all of us here, men, women, men in those days of course included women. All of us as human beings, we have to make a choice. Truth or the abyss. Countries have to make a choice. Now this is at a level which is not individual but institutional. And then continents have to make a choice. And this is something which we do not fully appreciate. But at a continental level, in the Earth's consciousness, there are changes that are taking place, not only in the climate but in the geology. In Europe, when they started fracking, they began to have earthquakes everywhere. They stopped it. In America, they're continuing to frack everywhere, and earthquakes are taking place and they're suppressing the information. What happens to the Mother Earth at a continental level when you poison her enough? She says, enough of this, and she gives you a shock. Massive earthquake, volcanic eruption, whatever form it may take, it shakes up humanity. In the past, it has happened 12,000 years ago when Atlantis sank underwater. And it has been described how Earth could not bear the suffering and the falsehood of humanity. And so it went underwater. And you find in the Puranas similar stories, when Earth could not bear the falsehood of humanity, she calls for help and the avatar comes to change things. It's a similar situation today, where Earth is being suffocated, Mother Earth is being suffocated by human falsehood. And we have a choice, and if we don't make that choice, it's abyss, truth or the abyss. And then she made another comment, 1971. She said, I cannot guarantee that the divine will find it worthwhile to save this humanity. I cannot guarantee that the divine will find it worthwhile to save this humanity. And she says, the choice is still in the balance. In other words, if we as a humanity do not take a worthwhile choice to live for the purpose for which we have come, for the higher truth, for the higher possibilities of our evolution, for the divine, then humanity may not survive as we have it. And then she writes, I hope it will not be that we have to pass through one of those dark nights of civilization. And she comments, whether by choice or by crashing circumstances, the change has to come. The crashing circumstances, nights of civilization, is one of those things where civilization itself collapses. And a few small pockets remain which survive the overall collapse and begin the new age, a new cycle. It's a possibility that we choose to all wake up and grow, or there's a collapse of civilization, and the choice is still on the balance. That's where our role is so important. Each one of us, beginning with our own lives, if we can make a difference, and if together we form these collectives for study, for sharing, for a form of a collective sadhana, then we can become these centers of light. And if there are sufficient numbers of centers of light connecting to each other, humanity may still make the transition without needing this night of civilization. But we are already seeing around us this kind of a compulsion of a collapse, crashing circumstances, as Mother has described. And we will see much more. The whole economic and political system, as you can see, is breaking so quickly. Yes, we'll stop here. There was one question which I will weave into the last closing observations. We have, at this point, a very important choice to make. And tomorrow, we will touch upon a different theme. Today, we looked at things from below upwards. The drive of our ego and science in matter and looking upwards to higher possibilities. Tomorrow, we will look the other way, from the soul's perspective of life, and how it sees life and why it chooses to enter birth, and what is it that it is trying to experience. It will be a nice complement. The question which has been put here is how to surrender without words. And this is something which is relevant for us, because an essential part of our sadhana is to consciously offer ourselves to the Divine Mother, to the Divine Shakti, so that she can work in us. And we can begin with a formulation of a prayer. There was a beautiful prayer which was given to us earlier, which Sri Aurobindo has given. In the night and in the day, be always with me. But there comes a point where the prayer and the formulation which comes through the mind and the emotions, they become quiet. And very quietly, joyously from the heart, we give ourselves to the Mother. We feel ourselves her child. As children, we were taught a prayer which comes from our tradition. If you remember that, you must have learnt it also in Sanskrit. It goes something like this. Samudra vasane devi parvatastava mandale Vishnu patni namastubhyam padasparsham kshamasvame. Addressed to the Mother Earth, who is the beloved of Vishnu, of the Divine, who wears the clothing of the oceans. You see, it is the picture of the earth seen from space. She wears clothing of the oceans. The mountains are her source of nourishment for life on the earth. And I bow to thee, who is the beloved of the Lord. Please forgive that I place my feet on you. This idea that one offers, surrenders, bows down to the Divine Mother in the form of the physical earth herself, who is herself the divine embodiment. We turn one step higher and we say, Mother India, who is also an embodiment of the Divine Mother, and Mother Earth, and then the Divine Mother who presides on the whole universe and beyond. This picture is what we have there when you see the Mother sitting in front of the map of India, where she is seated. At the same time, she is the transcendent Divine Mother, the universal Divine Mother, Mother India, and also for us, our physical mother. And in all these, she embodies herself. And we were marching in front of her as children. You notice she did not place that symbol and map of India in her room or at the samadhi for you to pray. She placed it where you are doing your activities, where you are developing your body and its skills and its abilities. And so the suggestion here is this: whatever you may do in life, you do it with this idea that you are doing it as your service to the Mother. And in any of these levels, Mother Divine, transcendent, universal, individual, Mother Earth, Mother India, whatever form it takes for you most easily, you do it for her. Just this idea. And then whatever work you do may be done in a spirit of consecration without needing words always to be in prayer. But you remind yourself in the beginning and at the end, and if possible, maintain that attitude. Sri Aurobindo gives as the core practice of the integral yoga to ask for nothing, to not even ask for the success of the yoga, to ask only that the divine will may be accomplished through you in all that is done. And that already is a form of surrender. It requires no words, it requires just an attitude of self-giving and opening to her. So we will discuss this in more detail tomorrow when we look at the other perspective of the soul as it enters life. And for now we can briefly concentrate for about a minute in meditation.
Amen.